If the story had been recorded on film, the most dramatic scene of the Apostle Paul's journey from Caesarea, Palestine to Rome for his trial would have been on the tiny island of Malta. Malta is located in the central Mediterranean Sea south of Sicily. So how did Paul end up on the island of Malta? And what happened there that Dr. Luke, who was traveling with Paul at the time, remembered so much that he later wrote about it so vividly in the book of Acts? In the last few chapters of the book of Acts, it's written that the Jews who did not believe in Jesus Christ persecuted the Apostle Paul, attempting to kill him, but without success. Paul was taken to Caesarea, where he was tried before Festus, the governor of the Jews at the time, and Herod Agrippa, king of Judea. They could find no guilt in him and wanted to release him. But Paul insisted on appealing to Caesar, the emperor of Rome. Festus then delivered Paul and the other prisoners to Julius, the centurion, who was in charge of escorting them to Rome. Their passage across the Mediterranean was slow and perilous, without a fair wind. After a nearly fatal journey at sea for more than 10 days, the boat finally ran aground on the butt of an island, and they all managed to make it ashore. At first, they did not recognize the island, but later they learned that it was the island of Malta. Malta was at the time the center of the east-west shipping line and had a fine harbor. Therefore, sailors would have been familiar with the island. But because they had been confused by the wind and the waves, and the place where the ship ran aground was relatively desolate, they did not recognize it at first. Acts chapter 28, verse 2 says, "When all the 276 men on board had come ashore, the islanders showed an unusual kindness. They built a fire and welcomed us all because it was raining and cold." Apparently, the islanders had taken the initiative to welcome them. When we see the word islanders, do we immediately think of uncivilized barbarians? In fact, the inhabitants of Malta were quite well established. They were the descendants of the seafaring Phoenicians. It was probably because they were not influenced by Greek culture and spoke the native language of the island instead of Greek that they were considered islanders. Although more than 200 people came ashore, the islanders were most interested in Paul, who was highly respected by his shipmates. They must have learned, too, that Paul was a prisoner to be sent to Rome for his trial. Therefore, Paul's every move became the focus of their attention. As they gathered around the fire to warm up, Paul picked up a bundle of sticks and placed them on the fire, when suddenly a poisonous snake came out and bit his hand. Paul threw the snake into the fire, and his hand did not swell up afterwards, and he was not killed by the snake. The islanders had probably never seen such an anomaly, and they assumed that Paul was a god and therefore impervious to it. The news must have quickly reached Publius, the governor of Malta. As noted in Acts chapter 28, verse 7, there was an estate nearby that belonged to Publius, the chief official of the island. He welcomed us to his home and showed us generous hospitality for 3 days. Publius was probably the highest official appointed by the Roman government on the island of Malta. He had land there and was likely a native of the island. The reason why Publius had shown the Apostle Paul and his fellow workers such hospitality, apart from that he was as friendly as the other islanders, was probably that he also thought Paul was a god and therefore should be treated well. And what Paul did next made him look even more like a god. It's recorded in Acts chapter 28, verses 8 and 9. His father was sick in bed, suffering from fever and dysentery. Paul went in to see him and after prayer placed his hands on him and healed him. When this had happened, the rest of the sick on the island came and were cured. It is said that a fever was prevalent on the island of Malta, which was caused by a kind of bacteria found in goat's milk, which means many people on the island must have been infected. Publius' father was healed by Paul laying hands on him in prayer. As for the other sick people on the island, it has been speculated that Dr. Luke, who was traveling with Paul, was also involved in their care because of what it says at the end of Acts 28:9. Were cured. which in the original Greek means receive medical care. One might wonder, did the Apostle Paul object to being regarded as a god by the people of Malta? He should have. For the apostles of the Lord never allowed themselves to be treated as gods. Paul stayed in Malta for 3 months, during which time he must have proclaimed the holy name and power of Jesus Christ and solemnly declared that he was but a man. Although this process is recorded, it is evidenced by the subsequent behaviors of the people on the island. Acts chapter 28, verse 10 says, "They honored us in many ways, and when we were ready to sail, they furnished us with the supplies we needed." The word honored in the original Greek means payment, similar to the fee paid for seeing a doctor. As we see in this verse, not only did Publius and the islanders reward Paul and his fellow men with gifts, but when it was time for them to leave Malta, they also put on board everything they would need so that they could continue with their final journey to Rome without wanting. As a Chinese saying goes, repaying favor with gratitude is great kindness. Publius's family and the islanders of Malta, as they were called, showed kindness before and after receiving the favor of others. It should make us consider how we respond to favors. Today, are we showing any kindness after receiving the favor of others, let alone before? Having freely received the eternally effective salvation that our Lord Jesus Christ has prepared for us by giving his life, do we think often about how to thank him? Are we grateful for the triune God's daily, hourly, and moment-by-moment guidance and care, and offer our sacrifices of thanksgiving? For it is written in Psalm chapter 50, verse 23, "Those who sacrifice thank offerings honor me."